We now turn to look at Aboriginal populations of different types and how their skills are matched to the jobs that they're in at the aggregate level. The first chart is for band members on reserve. What we see is there is a slight oversupply of people with level 1 skills. So there are more level 1 people than there are jobs at that level. We also see a much bigger surplus of level 2 people. So we have Aboriginal on reserve band members with level 2 skills that are about 15% more likely to be without the necessary skills associated with their occupation than the non-Aboriginal population. And then shortages of level 3, 4, and 5 people where there are jobs, there aren't enough people to fill the jobs that are available. If we turn to band members living off reserve in British Columbia, we see a slightly different pattern, still a surplus of level 1 people, an even bigger surplus of level 2 people, a shortage of level 3 people, 4 people, and level 5 people. And then turning to other Aboriginals living off reserve, we actually have more level 1 jobs than we have people, so a reversal. We still have a massive surplus of level 2 people and shortages of level 3, 4, and 5. These misfits are important economically because they imply when someone doesn't have the skills to do their job, it costs the employer in lost productivity, in higher error rates, in all sorts of negative things happen to the individuals and to at the workplace. And where there are shortages, where there aren't enough people to fill available jobs, they also suffer because you don't get full productivity out of those. So from a public policy point of view, the welfare of Aboriginals in BC depends on eliminating these misfits. If we drive this story of utilization, skill utilization, down to its lowest level and look at the match between individuals' actual skills and the demands of the occupations they're in, what we see is of all workers, Aboriginal and non in BC, half of them have literacy skill levels below the level associated with satisfactory job performance. This implies a huge economic penalty, that if we were to eliminate the shortage, things would get better. We have about 30%, a little better than 30% of all workers in BC in literacy balance. On the face of it, this is okay, but it doesn't give any cushion to absorb increasing skill demand. So for those workers, as skill demands rise, they're going to have to think about raising their literacy skills. And finally, we have slightly less than 20% of the workforce have a surplus of literacy skills. And this is problematic as well, because if we found a way to make jobs more knowledge and skill intense, we're going to get economic benefit from that skill that the education system created for us, and we have yet to find a way to put to use. If we extend this analysis from all workers down to Aboriginal workers, we see that they are relatively disadvantaged. Instead of 50% of them being in literacy skill shortage, it sits at 60%. So in an efficient labor market, like we described earlier in this presentation, Aboriginal workers, in this case band members living on reserve, will be systematically disadvantaged. They'll be less likely to get hired, and when they get hired, they will be paid lower wage rates, and they'll be much more likely to be released, and they'll be offered far less adult education and training than their more skilled peers. For these band members on reserve in BC, we have smaller percentages in balance and in literacy skill surplus. That means that for the upper end of the skill distribution, things are roughly in balance. If we shift to look at band members off reserve, they're also 10% more likely to be in literacy skill shortage and slightly less likely to be in balance and surplus than the non-Aboriginal population. Story the same. This higher increased shortage will translate into disadvantage in the labor market in all of the things that matter: employment, wage rates, and avoiding unemployment. And other Aboriginals in BC, it's exactly the same thing. It's 10% more likely to be in skill shortage than their non-Aboriginal peers. In this case, these are largely Métis. And so the general conclusion is all Aboriginal adult populations are disadvantaged because of their skills in the BC labor market. So now I'm going to turn to, if we have a problem that affects people so profoundly, and particularly Aboriginal workers, what would it take to fix that problem? What's the nature of the intervention that would have to be undertaken? What would it cost to fix, and what would the potential benefits be? Starting with numbers, 76,000 Aboriginals out of 133,000 Aboriginals are in literacy skill shortages. That's the bad news. It's a very high percentage. That's a lot of potential learners that need literacy skill upgrading. The good news is that they are mostly in what we call literacy segments C and D. These are not people who can't read. They actually can read quite well, but not well enough to meet the demands of the jobs that they find themselves in. They lack the skills associated with solving level 3 tasks, things like dealing with conditional information and very complicated texts. So the fix for them would be relatively cheap on a per unit basis, but there's a lot of them, so the total cost is relatively high. We have estimates of the total cost of the fix of eliminating literacy skill shortages in Aboriginal populations in British Columbia. For band members, it's a little more than $120 million would have to be invested to get rid of those shortages, split roughly evenly between band members living on and off reserve. And for the other Aboriginal populations in the province, about $60 million would fix their literacy problem. If we translate those investments into what economic benefits would ensue were we to invest, we have data on how much earnings would go up, and we know that they'd go up massively. We're looking at anywhere between 140 and almost 400% rates of return on those investments. Skills go up, the shortages are eliminated, employers are able to pay more in wages because the productivity of the workers are up. So in the first year after the problem was fixed, you'd realize a 300% return in higher earnings. The amounts vary by the type of Aboriginal worker, whether they're living on and off reserve or a band member or not, but we have the numbers for where those people are. If we have a literacy problem and we want to fix it and someone makes those investments, we have to know where it is to look to find the potential learners and situate our programs there and put the money in the places that are the most needy of help. The first literacy snapshot I'm going to show you is for neighborhoods in Vancouver. In this display, that's every neighborhood in Greater Vancouver, and green is good and red or dark orange is bad. The more you are to red and orange, the higher the percentage of people with level 1 and 2 skills. So this will help literacy practitioners and governments put their resources where the problem is. The second thing we have done is create report cards for practically every community in the country. This one's for the CMA of Vancouver. They are ranked 69 out of 328 communities in their economic demand for literacy skill. So they're not the highest demand, but they're in the top part of the distribution. There is almost 500 million points of literacy that could be put to economic use. The average skill level of an employed person in Vancouver is 301 points, well into level 3. So something that bodes well for Vancouver's economic performance. But they're only using 66% of that available supply, well below the province of Alberta that uses 71%. And so increasing utilization in Vancouver is an important policy objective. If we turn to the cost and benefit side, it would require an investment of $672 million, or roughly $1,400 per learner, to get rid of their occupational literacy skill shortages. A lot of money. But that investment would increase productivity, and employers, as a result of that increased productivity, would be able to pay out $3 billion more in earnings to their workers. Roughly $6,800 per worker per year, and that's a big amount when the average Canadian earns something like $43,000 a year. It would be a big bonus. And finally, one could look at earning another $1 billion if you found a way to increase the demand for literacy skill and soaked up those surpluses. A second literacy snapshot, this one for Thompson-Nicola Valley, where there are large Aboriginal populations. And what you see, it's that orange, burnt orange there, that literacy skills are relatively low, and so there are much higher proportions of adults with level 1 and 2 skills. The report card for Kamloops, one of the major urban centers in that region, they have a C grade, so well below Vancouver, 22 million points of literacy that they could put to economic use. A score of 306 for the employed population, so very high in level 3, which means that the people who are unemployed are relatively less skilled than in Vancouver. A literacy utilization rate of 66%, roughly equivalent to Vancouver. Again, strong economic benefits associated with creating more jobs and more skill and knowledge intense jobs, and GDP would go up as a result. Whether it's individuals, their employers, or governments, someone would have to sign a check for $22 million in order to eliminate literacy skill shortages in Kamloops, an investment of about $1,200 per learner. That happily would generate $103 million of extra earnings each and every year following the investment, an increase in an individual's earnings of about $5,800, and you could get an extra $73 million in additional earnings every year if you found a way to use the literacy skill surpluses that are in Kamloops currently. So now a summary of the entire presentation in capsule form. First important thing to remember, literacy skill matters for us as individuals and us collectively. It defines our rates of economic growth in terms of productivity growth, our ability to deal with advanced technology, and the overall growth of the economy. It matters to us as individuals because differences in skill are the source of most of the inequality in the things we value most: income, health, engagement in the community. Literacy also has a huge influence on what we get out of our tax investments. Serving a more literate population costs less to deliver the same package of goods and services, and so were we to fix these literacy skill shortages, we would see benefits in the return on investment in our tax investments. And finally, something of crucial importance to Aboriginal populations in BC, giving Aboriginal populations access to the literate tools of the literate culture would allow them to compete fully and fairly in the economy and socially, while at the same time allowing them to preserve their language and culture. It's a tool that allows people to take control of their lives and become less dependent. So thank you. Want to know more about literacy? Go to any of the following websites shown on the screen: the website for Data Angel, the website for Statistics Canada, the website for Bow Valley College, or the website for the Canadian Council on Learning. you'll find out about how important literacy is to Canada's future economic competitiveness and our collective well-being.